Joining us now, staff writer for The New Yorker, Susan Glasser, and Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist for The Washington Post, Carol Leonnig. Let's talk about that, what they voted for. 40 cases right now brought against the Trump administration with nationwide injunctions in place. It includes Harvard admitting foreign students, the Education Department requiring the elimination of DEI programs. News on that, by the way, out of the University of Virginia. Federal funding freeze, USAID funding freeze, obviously birthright citizenship. Carol, I mean, should we come with the expectation now that the Trump administration is going to charge forward on all of those cases and that all of the injunctions on those current pending cases are going to be severely limited?
Well, I think there are some legal reasons why it won't be easy to have this exact same thing play out as did in birthright citizenship. You know, what Justice Sotomayor said was that she was sort of appalled by the complicity of the Trump government and the administration to try to deny this right to individuals so that they each have to, one by one, come to court and to fight for what is, you know, on its face, a constitutional right, end of story. And in other places, though, this is emboldened certainly the Trump administration on other arguments, because why can't they come back to the Supreme Court and say, how can we not have a one by one rather than a national injunction? That's what this was settled on. The argument that if you want to defend your constitutional right to having been born in this country, something that we protect, if you want to defend that right, then come to court to do it. And Judge Kagan said, you know, the result of the, Justice Kagan, forgive me, said that the result of this will be that poor people will not be able to defend their right, and people who can pay for a lawyer and come to court will, even though it's kind of obvious that it is their right.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about with the class action lawsuits and whether that makes up ground. One of the other injunctions that's out there concerns voter ID and actions the president is trying to take to make voting stricter, I guess you can say. Proof of citizenship at at polling places. That's what the president wants to do. It's what Republicans have been wanting to do for a long time. But what sort of burden would that place on people, Susan, if voter ID is something that is going to be enforced, I don't know, in Georgia, but not enforced in California, enforced in Indiana, but not enforced in New York?
Yeah, Katie, I mean, look, it's just like the situation with women's reproductive health. 3 years after the Supreme Court, the same Supreme Court threw out Roe versus Wade, essentially we have different laws in different parts of the country. One part of the country where I'm sitting in right now thinks that it's a part of a woman's right. Another part of the country thinks that women don't have these rights. And we're now going to see this potentially not only applying to different areas, whether it's the ability to do something as basic as vote with one set of rules or another set of rules, that's going to be potentially compromised. Right now, I saw Congressional Research Service had estimated there were something like 24 injunctions placed on Trump orders around the country right now already. So that could be impacted by the Supreme Court decision today. We'll see if the Justice Department, as I expect, does go ahead and challenge judges to lift those injunctions and to comply with this new precedent that the Supreme Court has set. But I think that we're moving very rapidly, more rapidly in some ways than I even anticipated, toward a world where there are just different Americas, not only because of culture or politics, but according to the law, that de jure we're getting different Americas now as a result of a Supreme Court that I think it's not right to call a conservative Supreme Court. I would call this a radical Supreme Court, revising American life. Yeah, a red and a blue America, depending on which state you live in. There's always been some difference in laws, but there's some big differences now. And Carol, Susan was laying out one of the biggest ones, which is a woman's right to get an abortion or a woman's right to get care at a hospital if they're having a miscarriage. It depends very, very much on whether you are in New York or you're in Idaho.
Absolutely. I'm really glad Susan brought that up, because the Washington Post had a story the other day about the huge volume of abortion care that is essentially now traveling on a kind of underground railroad, in which a large number of people who are getting care in so-called safe states are coming from the South, where they don't feel that they are safe to get that kind of care. Maybe it's because rape, incest, some other reason, economic, that they do not want to carry a child to term, medical health of the mother. But for whatever reason, the trend line is that people are moving out of those traveling whichever way they can, moving away from their own states to try to get care somewhere else. And I've heard a lot of reproductive health advocates saying that this is actually starting to impact the economies of states where abortion restrictions are most restrictive, because corporations are starting to recognize that it will be hard to employ and recruit families and women to their states if this is the law of that state.
Yeah, concerns about the health of mothers or even daughters within those families. Politically speaking, this is interesting because the courts have been the big way that Democrats or those who disagree with Donald Trump's policies have pushed back on them, getting a federal injunction, getting a court to stop things while they bring it through the court system and get it eventually to the Supreme Court to decide on the merits of the case. And this was the same thing that happened during the beginning of the first Trump administration as well. The Democrats have at least a year and a half now, Susan, before they have a chance to retake at least part of Congress. Right now, Republicans aren't stopping Donald Trump in any way. But they have a year and a half before they can do that. What signal is this sending, or what pressure is this putting on the Democratic Party to come up with a strategy and a message to convince the American public to push back itself when the courts can no longer do that, make that effort on their behalf?
Yeah, I mean, you're right to put the spotlight on Congress right now, Katie. I mean, the bottom line is that you have a Supreme Court that has told us very clearly in this decision, and remember, told us very clearly a year ago in their remarkable presidential immunity decision. Those two decisions together have basically said we are going to do nothing to stand in the way of even a potentially out of control, even a potentially rogue executive president of the United States. That means we've got the third branch of government. And while it is controlled by Republicans in both the House and the Senate, Republicans have a very narrow majority in the House of Representatives right now. And, again, I think from my perspective, as I've watched, the United States versus other countries that have grappled with kind of authoritarian pushes against their democracy, the difference that I notice is that people are focused on next year's midterm elections, but they need to be defending rights before they're taken away. That would mean in a different political setup, pressuring Congress right now, not writing off the Republican House just because it's in the control of Republicans. It's a very narrow majority of Republicans. The bottom line is, do Republicans have the votes to repeal birthright citizenship the way that the Constitution intended us to make laws, which is that Congress passes laws, which is that they're then signed by the president? They don't have the vote. So you hear Pam Bondi talking about the president was elected to do this. That's not how our system works. And what's really remarkable, I think, to many people watching this is that it's actually outside of our constitutional system to have a president in a White House determining major issues of national policy. The Supreme Court has thrown up its hands, but it's Congress's job to assert its prerogative.